All right, guys, welcome back to Elite SAR Training and our search tactics module of our basic search operations course. So in this particular video, we're going to talk specifically to search tactics. We're actually going to talk through some of the different tactics, passive, active, and talk about the different types of active tactics. So we're actually going to get into more of the fundamentals of this is how we search during a search event. So whenever we talk about the different ways that you can characterize and categorize search tactics, there's three different buckets that we look at. There's investigative tactics, which investigation is one of those things that it begins as soon as someone is reported missing, and it concludes after the search operations have concluded and all details around the victim's ordeal have been collected. So, I mean, the investigative is one of those things that kind of happens in the background, but it starts as soon as we understand that someone's missing and goes all the way through. It goes all the way through the end, and we've collected all the information that we need to collect about the search and what happened in that event. So that's one tactic, and it's something that's kind of always ongoing until we have reached the end on that. Passive and active tactics are more familiar to us in the realm of search operations. A passive tactic would be where we're trying to make the victim come to you, and an active tactic is where we're deploying assets to locate a victim. So we'll first talk about our passive techniques, our passive search techniques, and we'll start with containment or confinement. Again, with a passive technique, we're trying to draw the victim to a certain spot, or we're trying to intercept the victim on their line of travel, and we do the latter by containment or confinement. They both have the same meaning, but I've heard them used interchangeably. This is achieved by establishing a perimeter around a search area or creating checkpoints along a potential route of travel. Think of patrols, road intersections, trail intersections. Looking at the routes of travel on the map and having people just sit on those and see if we can catch someone walking into the area. So looking at the example here, if we have our victim down here in our, hang on, we did not select our pin. So if we have our victim sitting down here at this point last seen, this is where we last saw them. Their intended destination is over here on the other side of the lake. And as you can see by the trails and the roads, there are many different routes that they could have taken to get there, which means there's many decision points along the way where something could have potentially gone wrong for them. So how we would deploy containment here is we would look at areas where there are trail intersections. Whenever I look at this map, I look at where the trail intersections are, the major arteries and stuff like that, and that's a spot where I could maybe want to post people up, so that way we can maybe intercept some of the traffic coming through there, and interview people along the way if they're still mobile. We can. It's a very easy technique to just sit someone down in a chair and watch for people moving in and out of the areas. We could also post somebody up potentially at the entrance of the facility here as well. There's many spots where we can potentially look at putting containment on this particular example. With another passive technique would be an attractant. So with an attractant, we're trying to use some kind of we're using noise, or we're using some kind of a visual cue to draw the subject to a particular location or to prompt a response, okay? So attractant could potentially be a whistle, could be a siren. If we have some engines or units out there, we could potentially make a sound with the sirens, and that could potentially draw them in. Loudspeakers, spotlights, using drones is another way that we could potentially attract somebody. They start seeing something in the air, that may make them think that there's someone out there looking for them. They may move to a location where it's easier for them to be spotted by those. And then I've also seen some teams, they'll develop some kind of a care package. They'll drop at a trail junction. Maybe it's something where they can't post up people. They don't have enough people to post up to do like a proper containment. So they'll drop like a bucket intended to be found by the victim, that'll have some basic provisions in it and have some instructions on staying put. I've seen that as well, and that's pretty cool technique to attract somebody in there. But whenever we start talking attractants, that's where we're trying to draw them into a certain spot. An active technique is really probably what we most commonly think of in search operations. This is what whenever we go out and do a lot of training, we're usually training in clue detection and active searching. And whenever you look at it, there's 4 different types of active search techniques that we can utilize, and each one, it may have some varying resources that can contribute to that particular technique, and they can also produce varying levels of probability of detection, which we talked about before. Probability of detection being the likelihood of a search team finding a clue or the victim in a certain area. And whenever I alluded to this maybe in the last video, but whenever we start talking about probability detection, it's important to make that distinction. If we're talking about the probability of detection of finding a person, it is likely going to be much higher than finding a clue. So whenever we start talking probability detection, make sure you're clear of what that value means, okay? Probability detection is typically expressed as an estimated percentage, but it can be a mathematical calculation. There are different ways I've seen where probability detection can be calculated. A lot of the times, it's a very subjective figure that's thrown out there either by the search planner or the search team leader in the field. And it's usually you put some kind of a quantifier to it or qualifier saying, if you were looking for 10 playing cards in your search area, how many do you think you would have found? And I've seen other teams where they'll take like a list of influences or factors that can influence probability detection, and they'll have the team leader or whoever was in charge of the search in the field. They'll say, based off of what you saw, assign a value to each one of these factors, and then they'll average it out at the end. So some factors that can influence our probability detection are the search area size, the resource that's utilized, whether that is a ground team, a canine team, what resource exactly did we put in there, the search technique used, how fast they were going, the speed of the search, terrain, vegetation, the size of the team, the experience of the team, these weather, time of day, how long they've been searching already, what's their fatigue level, and then honestly also the victim's condition. That can also be something that will influence the probability of detection. So there's a number of factors that go into influencing it. So it's not a perfect science in terms of how we come up with that figure. I would just say for the folks here, if you are asked what your probability of detection was, I'll be honest. This is something where it's really easy to inflate a number and maybe provide a little bit unfounded confidence that an area was searched well. I've been on some searches where we would cover a fairly large area, then we go back and I hear someone say that, would you feel like you had a 90% probability of detection? And well, no, maybe 30, and we search pretty good and search pretty hard to get that 30%. So it's one of those things where really think very critically about what that figure means, because at the end of the day, that probability detection that figure is going to be used to determine whether or not we need to put additional resources into an area. So with that said, let's take a look at the different types of active searches. The first one being the rapid response or the hasty search. It's more commonly known by that as a hasty search, but there's a little bit of that's kind of viewed as not as a favorable of a phrase. Rapid response is better because hasty makes it sound like we just looked real quick. We weren't very thorough. So rapid response is really what the term that I usually try to use, but the criteria is the same. We're talking about speed, right? We're talking about speed, and that's the ability for small teams of 2 to 3 searchers being able to move through an area towards an intended destination or along an easy route of travel to try to bring a quick end to the search. These, it could be ground searchers. This is honestly where canines tend to be part of a hasty response. Track trailing canines, man trackers as well. This is a great place for them to be utilized as a search. Again, the goal is to bring a quick end to it. Your teams are really expected to be self-sufficient, and they need to be able to operate with little information regarding the subject or little direction from the command post, which means that clue consciousness is absolutely critical. All rapid response team members should be proficient in clue identification. That's including being track aware. And I will again point to even the canine units. Some level of track awareness is very much required if you want to be a good, well-rounded, and effective searcher. Okay, so let's see here. Some of the techniques that are typically used as part of a hasty search, that's, of course, your investigation, thoroughly checking of last known points for clues, direction of travels. We'll beat this area. You see the circle here on the map here. We'll beat the heck out of this circle that can be represented as the 25% ring, or 300 meters from a last known point or the initial planning point. Really just absolutely flooding that with resources and doing a thorough check, because most searches are going to be resolved inside that small circle. Right around that last known point is where most searches are going to be resolved. Following known or suspected routes, running trails, checking perimeters, doing some sign cutting if you have man trackers available to you, checking attractions, which is what we have represented here in the the smaller circles here. These are structures that are on our maps. These are potential points of interest that we may want to send teams to go check out. You'll see these roads here are highlighted. These are areas that we will want to hit pretty hard, because these are easy routes to travel away from our initial planning point. We're building everything off of that initial planning point, and these are the easy routes away from that. And some of these go to a specific point of interest for us. So whenever we say a rapid response or a hasty search, it's really working from the inside out and working those easy routes of travel and running those to the ground, because there's a high likelihood that we may have we'll catch the victim or we'll catch a clue along those routes. Okay. Clue consciousness here is very critical. So train rapid response teams, man trackers, canines. You can deploy aircraft and drones here as well. During this spot, they can easily check some of those higher probability areas. If nothing else, they may be good to get attention of our victim. But we're looking for stuff that can cover a lot of ground fairly quickly in this rapid response phase. Whenever we talk about a type 2 search, this is typically a later stage in a search, but we still may have enough rationale to deploy it at the onset of a search. But this is a low coverage grid is what this is called. And for here, the criterion is efficiency, where it's a combination of speed and thoroughness is what we're trying to do here. But we're looking at deploying ground teams of 3 to 7 searchers, and they're assigned to search a high probability search area. So it may include some roads or easy routes of travel. It may be a segmented search area. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to space our searchers out. As you can see here, we have our searchers spaced out along a baseline here. This is what we call the baseline of the road would be. And you see how they're spread out, and each searcher is going to have a lane. Each searcher is going to have a lane, and we're all moving towards the same direction. We're all moving towards the same direction in an orderly fashion. And the blue here is going to represent the field of vision. So you can see there's not a lot of visual overlap between the searchers. There's a little bit, but not a whole lot. We're spreading them out wide. We're having them move in a grid-like manner, a systematic-like manner, and we're progressing through the area. So it's your critical spacing, which is, again, the distance, how far apart you are. It's going to produce a lower POD, but it's higher per it's a higher probability of detection per searcher hour of effort. Meaning, with the way we're spread out, whenever we run a hasty search. Let me go back a slide here. Let me go back a slide. Let me clear that. Whenever we do a hasty search or run a rapid response search, you may send two searchers down a particular path, but usually they're walking fairly close together and they're moving along fairly quickly. You have one person checking this side of the road, one person checking this side of the road, and if you have a third person, they're kind of hanging back and bringing up the rear with that, while these two are focused off to the side. But anyway, it's a much tighter formation that's moving quickly. So let me go back to this slide. In this slide, our searchers are spread out where there's the low visual overlap. So it's still gonna have a fairly low POD, but because it's spread out, you actually net a higher probability of detection than you would having that type 1 search. So it can be used early on in a search if you have reason to believe your victim may not be along a trail, or there may be a high probability area that's nearby the initial planning point, and it makes sense to go ahead and grid that out and go ahead and move through it quickly. It may make sense to go ahead and do that, especially if you have a specialized resource potentially en route that can maybe better suited for some of that trail running or that rapid response. This is a good something to do if you have a large volume of people, and you want to do something that's meaningful and contributing toward the search. Your teams are typically going to consist of your more experienced searcher. These should be your higher trained, more experienced, good navigation skills, very good clue awareness. Again, a lot of self-sufficiency here as well. But this is a group that there's a lot of discipline involved here. There's a lot of discipline needed to maintain that line, because we don't want this particular searcher to be way out here and we're still back here searching. We want to maintain a nice orderly line the best we can as we move through the grid together. That's what we want to do. So that way we can keep an eye on each other, make sure we're accountable for the person next to us. We want to try to keep that line as best possible. There you go. So a type 3 search is called a high coverage grid search. And here the difference between a type 2 and type 3 is this. It's more about thoroughness. Okay. So as you can see, this is the exact same search area that we had in the previous example. But now you see we have more searchers added to the line. You're looking at like 5 to 9 searchers on a particular team. I've run it as high as probably 12 in running a tight grid search like this. But you're still kind of hitting those high probability search areas if you still have some of those, if you weren't satisfied with the results that you got previously. You can go ahead and pack those in there, but you may also be transitioning to some of those lower priority, lower probability search areas, just because at this stage in the search, we haven't turned anything up through rapid response or through low coverage grid or investigation. We really need to buckle down and get much more thorough, much more systematic, so that way we can field the question: is the victim even here? Is there a victim here to even find? So with that, this is the caveat with this right here. It's extremely thorough, and you're going to generate a higher probability of detection doing it this way. But this right here is the key bullet. It's extremely destructive. It's an extremely destructive way of searching. If there were a clue or some sign or anything like that, and it's missed by these folks, it's more than likely going to be destroyed, and it's something we can't replicate. So this is something that should be viewed as a last resort. Much tighter critical spacing. Remember on the last slide we looked at the field of vision, the blue representing the field of vision, and there wasn't a whole lot of overlap. Here we have much more overlap. It actually may even be tighter than this, where it's, you may be able to have enough overlap where you can see a body, but there may not be enough overlap to where you can see, a small clue. But it's much tighter, much more overlap. And as you can see, both on the previous slide and this one, what are our searchers doing in the example? They're not just walking a straight line. Well, this guy is just because he doesn't have anything, but we're purposefully wandering, right? See how we're weaving in and out throughout, so that way we can check behind stuff. We've got good coverage of where we have enough overlap where we can check behind stuff. This is an extremely thorough search that's happening right here in this example. At this stage in the search, I couldn't tell you what the right time frame is from a search manager perspective on when you might look at a type 3, where you may look at a type 3 search, but you're usually a little ways into the search unless you know from the onset we're likely looking at recovery. So at this stage, some of those initial responders, some of those more experienced searchers that you want to have on your A team, they may have already checked out and they've had to go home. They may have to go back to their normal lives. So at this stage, I typically see a lot less experienced searchers involved. And it's not and it's not that they can't perform either. It's just that you usually don't have a whole lot of very experienced people left at this point. They've either been used already, or they need to get back to work, or they've been otherwise redeployed to do something else. So they may not be available. So I typically see a mix in with untrained or lesser trained searchers, newer. Maybe even some of the emergency services may get mixed in. This may also be a point where you may want to pull an emergent volunteer that seems to have their stuff together. This may be an opportunity where they get pulled in there as well. But typically have less experienced searchers walking through this. You can see they all have their lanes, they all have their search lanes, and they're all wandering purposely through their search lanes, making sure they've got good coverage going through here. Okay, much tighter together. Type 4, which is our last one that we're going to go in, and that's an evidence search. And this is used in some extremely special circumstances. It's whenever we've generated little evidence related to the victim, or there's a specific clue that's being found. It may be an instance where we have a large number of emergent volunteers, and we may need to give them something to do, so that way they don't go out and search on their own. We want to try to control that search area the best we can. But if we have a large number of emergent volunteers, this may be something that we do just to kind of make them feel like they're involved, where they in a control way where they can't get hurt, or we're winding down on a search and we haven't turned anything up, and this is kind of like a last ditch effort. Let's try to find something, but the size of the team can vary, but the idea is, your searchers are moving shoulder to shoulder, very, very slow, extremely methodical. A lot of times on hands and knees, either walking slowly or crawling on your hands and knees over a much smaller search area. You're trying to find something. It is massively distracting and overly time consuming. This is certainly not something you want to start off with at all. It can be very resource intensive as well. And depending on the nature of the search, it may be performed strictly by trained personnel, or it could be by emergent volunteers, just depending on the situation. The example you're seeing here is actually an evidence search that I participated in a few years back related to a mine explosion in central Kentucky. And this is the area that we went in there searching. And this is basically our search pattern. We were staying above this little creek here, and we were going from the field to the tree line. The debris field from the explosion carried it about like that. And so our task was to try to find anything we can that we could tie back to our missing person, or our individual that was caught up in the explosion. So that's what an evidence search is going to look like. Usually it's under law enforcement supervision at that point. We'll talk briefly about the Caldwell sweep search techniques, because they're referenced quite a bit in a lot of search and rescue texts. A lot of the same ideas and theories that we've already kind of kicked around with how we space our searchers in type 2 and type 3 searches. I'm calling them out specifically because the criteria here is just a little bit different, and I feel like it's noteworthy. I debated keeping this in here or not, but I know that this is I've heard this I've heard this referred to in an active search environment before, so I decided to leave it in just so that way we can talk through it, and if you ever encounter these terms, then you'll at least know what that means. So Martin Caldwell developed these search to sweep search techniques, and they are based on some assumptions regarding the victim's condition, clothing, and the ability to communicate. So whenever we talk about a standard sweep, we're looking for adults wearing normal colored clothing, your red, blue, gray, black. Whenever we have no particular information available, this is kind of like just a normal, probably something more so in between a type 2 and a type 3 search. We may want to have some visual overlap, but maybe we want to spread out a little bit wider just so that way we can cover an area. That's the idea behind a standard sweep. A high visibility sweep is for people known to be wearing high visibility clothing. They've either got some fluorescent clothes on, some fluorescent colors or some bright colors, or you have some extremely open terrain where it's really easy to see. Okay, so we'll spread the teams out wider, and we call that a high vis sweep. A low vis would be someone looking for someone that's potentially unconscious, or they're wearing subdued colored clothing, your browns, your khakis, your dark greens, it's just something that's going to blend in with the environment a little better, a little harder to see. So it's exactly how it sounds. It's a low visibility sweep. The victim is presumed to be much harder to see, so we'll tighten up that formation. We'll tighten up that critical spacing as we move through the area. A body sweep is pretty well exactly like it sounds. We're looking for someone that is presumed to be deceased and they're laying prone on the ground. So that's again we're tightening that down so that way we can maximize that overlap. Caldwell is also credited for developing what's called the sound sweep, or at least the concept of the sound sweep. More so, I think he probably was one of the first ones to really publish it and do any research around it. But it's a very efficient form of grid searching that utilizes sound to locate a missing person. Of course, based on the assumption that the missing person will respond to the sound is probably the first thing. But the idea is you would spread your searchers out in a grid-like fashion on a road or a trail with some really extended spacing. I mean, to the point where you probably need to do this in pairs, so that way there's someone nearby because you're going to lose some visual oversight or some visual contact with the team next to you, but you have some extended spacing, and the command post is going to coordinate a whistle blow from all the searchers for a predetermined period of time. We're going to blow the whistle for 5 seconds, and then there's a little bit of a countdown on the radio. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast. Everybody blows their whistles for 5 seconds, or whatever the predetermined time is, and then after that, it's a complete silence. Everyone has to absolutely remain silent while we listen for a reply. In the research that I've seen on this, an extremely high probability of detection. Again, assuming based on the assumption that the person will respond, but they. I think maybe like 95% probability of detection of something like that in the right conditions. So it was very, very highly efficient. I've never participated in a search where we've done this, but I have participated in searches, or I've participated in searches where we've used like the sirens off of a fire engine. A good buddy of mine in a couple counties over, they actually had a search with a lady in a cornfield. And of course, whenever the corn grows up, it can be fairly tall, 8-9 feet tall. And she was lost out in the middle of a pretty good sized cornfield, and so they lined the perimeter of the cornfield with fire engines, and then they one by one they had the lady on the phone, so the lady was on the phone with them, and so they would go one by one on the fire engines until they identified which one was closest. She felt like she heard the loudest And then they sent the team in there to go out there and find her. They were also using drones and everything else to try to find her and lead her out. But they eventually the fire engine and using something similar to a sound sweep is what eventually they were able to hone in on her, send a team in, and get her out of the field, which is a pretty cool story. Let me clear my stuff here. Let's talk about night searching here for a moment. So I have participated in enough searches during the daytime and during the nighttime where there's a number of advantages and disadvantages to both. A lot of times searches are suspended at night just because whoever's in charge of the search they may not think a 24-hour operations is needed, or it's as poor as it sounds, they may not be interested in 24-hour operations. So they may go ahead and shut it down at night. But night searching specifically does have its specific advantages and they really can't be ignored, and it should be looked at as a potential tactic that we can leverage. So one of the advantages maybe you may be able to use individual resources not available during the daytime. So if you make the call out and you have your people respond, there may be some people that are stuck at work. They may not be able to respond during the daytime, but they may be able to respond at night. So if we search at night, we make the choice to search at night, we may be able to grab some good resources that weren't available during the daytime. More likely than not, your subject is less likely to move at night, especially if they've been out for a while. If they've been out for a while, they may want to hunker down and stop moving. We want them to stop moving because they can be potentially putting more distance between themselves and the searchers. So at nighttime, they're less likely to move. Some of your specialized resources, such as man trackers or canine units, they may have better success at night. I know I can speak as a man tracker. Searching at night has a lot of advantage. Searching at night has a lot of advantages because we can control the light source on our end. There's less people traffic at night, so we have a better chance of catching some sign or minimizing contamination in a particular area. A lot of canines do really, really well at night as well because as the air cools, the scent tends to pool, tends to settle, so it may be a little bit stronger scent at night for the canines to follow. So the specialized resources may actually have better luck at night than they would during the day. And then lastly, you may have the less likelihood of a media presence. And media typically isn't a problem. It's typically not an issue, but it is a distraction. It can be a distraction. So at nighttime, you're less likely to have that. The disadvantages of night searching are your overall search difficulty is going to increase just by the nature of it being dark outside. Being dark, you have a much more difficult time utilizing your tools. You have a much more difficult time just searching in general. You're limited to the beam of your flashlight. In a lot of cases, it's much more difficult to search at night from that perspective. Searcher fatigue can settle in a little bit earlier. You keep in mind that a lot of times these searchers are volunteers, so they have maybe been out working all day. They got up early, went to work, came home, and now you're getting called out 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and that's kind of like coming in on bedtime right there. And so they're amped up, they're ready to go, and you may have a good burn till about 1 or 2 in the morning, but after you kind of get past that space, you're feeling pretty whipped. So that fatigue can settle in just a little bit earlier at nighttime than it would during the day. If the subject is moving at night, it makes it very hard for us to catch up. Makes it very hard to catch up. You see this more so in despondents or children and teenagers that don't want to be found. We see it more there. More of the evasive type subject. They may prefer to move at night. So if they're found to be moving at night, which there are ways from a tracking perspective at least, we can tell if they're moving at night. If we start seeing some of that, it makes it much more difficult for us to catch up. And then lastly, you may have less interagency support at night. So if you rely on some of your partners Your partnering agencies, your partnering law enforcement or fire, or another search team, they may that may not be their jam. They may not be very interested in supporting at night, or may not be capable of supporting at night. So you may experience some less interagency support through night. All right, that wraps us up through the search tactics portion of this module. So we have one more to go, and then we have wrapped up the search tactics module. Thanks for watching.